there was not really a break. So we appreciate you jumping right in, and we'll take just a minute. All right, hi everyone. We're going to wait just a few more minutes for folks to get in the room. We know it was a fast turnaround between the last session, so we'll just take a moment, and it will also give my kids a moment to walk past the door, so bonus. All right, it looks, can you hear now, Emily? Okay, I was gonna say, I don't think anything was happening, but now things will happen. So it looks like our numbers are starting to level off. I expect maybe more folks will come after a little break, but we'll go ahead and get started since we have just some opening remarks for this closing session. I'm very happy to welcome you to our closing session of CALM, the Conference on Academic Library Management. We're so grateful to you all for being here and participating in our very first year. My name is Dani Cook. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of the co-organizers of CALM. We really couldn't have done this without all of you being here, so thanks so much. Moya, can you click it, please? Okay. This closing session will be recorded, so please make note of that. We do have the recording on now, and you'll be welcome to share this with your colleagues. Before we get into our content for today, I want to take a moment to do one more land acknowledgement. Since we're all over the country and actually beyond the US, which is pretty cool, we'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land, which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. We acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Native people that call the land we are each on home. So please join us in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can each in our own way try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So I'll give you all just a moment to take some time to reflect. Okay, we encourage you all to consider taking action, such as making a donation to a land recovery effort. One that we recommend is the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, or ILTF, and we'll share these slides after the presentation as well. Okay, so thank you so much for being the part of the very first CALM. We couldn't have done it without each and every one of you being here, entering our conversations in good faith, our amazing presenters who were vulnerable, who brought the most interesting topics, and all of our participants who engaged both on Twitter and in the conference itself. Our volunteers, who we'll talk more about in a little bit, we are so grateful to you, as well as to our sponsors who kept this free. So it's the first CALM, but it won't be the last, and we're so happy that you've been a part of it. So we're going to take just a minute to look back over the week, which flew by for me. I hope it did for y'all too. We know that it was, it's during the pandemic. It's all hard. We're so grateful that you made space. We had a lot of things going on. So we had 2 keynotes. We had 28 conference sessions with a huge range of presenters, administrators, middle managers, individual contributors who are in leadership roles, and student workers. And we're so happy to have represented the wide range of workers in academic libraries. We held 9 discussions on Wednesday. We look forward to your feedback on those, and evolving those as we continue to grow the conference. And there was so much activity in the chats and Q&A, like phenomenal. I think I heard so many people say, I've never seen so much happening in the chat, and I just see the little flashes right now in the chat, which gets to that point. And so many people being generous with their resources. So we will be putting together a reading and resource list that will be coming soon. We've tried to capture everything from the chat, and we'll also invite you all to continue to contribute to that. Had a couple people volunteer to lead a book club for us, so stay tuned for some details on that. And there was just a huge amount of Twitter activity, so please follow us at Calm Conference if you are on Twitter. It's a great place for you to keep up with what we're doing, and also see like when we have the recordings posted. We'll also be emailing that out as well. So at the end of conferences, I personally like to think about some themes, some things that I can take away from the conference, and I invited the rest of the volunteers for Calm to do that as well. So this is a list of the things that we identified as things we're going to take with us beyond this conference. So we were so fortunate to have Katrina Davis Kendrick open the conference with her keynote address. And one of the comments that she made that really resonated throughout the conference is a quote from Brené Brown: "Clear is kind and unclear is unkind." I can't even tell you how many times I heard that in different sessions. We did also hear that you all would love to see Brené Brown also be a keynote, and not sure we'll ever be able to afford that, but we hear you. We'll see what we can do. Other things that came through multiple sessions, that transparency and communication as much as possible is something we value as managers and as workers. There is never something that is too much communication. That's a theme that we heard throughout the conference. Equity, diversity, and inclusion work is central to everything we do and needs to be ongoing. We need actions, not just words. Self-care and self-preservation is vital as a manager when managing others, and also dealing with racism and other systematic challenges. Recognizing power and positionality is critical in the decision-making, especially for those of us in management positions and roles of institutional power. We can't take that lightly. Don't feel pressured to do more, and don't pressure your direct reports to do more, especially when we're in a pandemic situation. I saw someone say today, no stretch goals at this time, right? Like the pandemic is a stretch goal in and of itself. Workplaces where you can be authentic are healthy workplaces, that being vulnerable takes courage, and that recognizing the humanity in yourself and others is critical for good management. We had some great discussions of this on Twitter as well, so I will ask Moya if she can turn the page. So from @accession_this, core to the spirit of Calm 2021 seems to be the application of anti-oppressive structures and intersectional approaches to management. We really appreciate that that energy has been brought in this space and hope to continue that conversation. And then from @Elena Feinstein, an example of something that's been in this conference, the intersection of vulnerability and rigor. And that is really something that you all brought as presenters, and we're grateful to have created the space and to have you share that space with us. I also want to give a shout out to something that's currently happening on Twitter, which is #CalmPets. We loved seeing pets during this conference. Wilson the dog, we love you. So please take part in that if you have also had pets with you during this conference. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Kelli.
Well, I just wanted to thank everybody to follow up with what Dani said, and thank everybody so much for such an amazing conference. And to remind everybody to check your email, because we are sending out feedback forms, and we really appreciate your feedback, and we want to make the next one even better. So if you take a look at your screen, you'll see there's a link right there, and you will also get an email. Please take the time to let us know what can be done next time to make it even better. Thanks all.
Hello everyone. So I just want to take a moment to recognize everyone who has helped to make sure the conference ran as smoothly as possible. So as always, thanks to the core committee and the conference committee members for organizing the conference. Thanks to our presenters for agreeing to share their ideas with us. Thanks to the discussion group facilitators for helping to further conversations around topics important to current and aspiring library managers. Thanks to the moderators, tech support, and chat monitors for assisting our presenters and overseeing our breakout sessions. Thanks to the live tweeters and Twitter account monitors for getting word out about the conference and sessions and sharing takeaways from the presentations. Thanks to everyone who recommended books, articles, and other resources so we can continue to reflect and engage with the themes that emerged during the conference. And last but not least, thank you to everyone for attending and participating in the conference. Next slide, please.
And on the theme of our gratitude, we also want to thank all of our sponsors for this conference. As I mentioned at the opening keynote, it was really important to us as the planning team that our sponsors were other libraries rather than vendors. So we wanted to share our gratitude to those libraries for helping us pay for this conference, and of course to make the conference free to our attendees. So many thanks to George Mason University Libraries, Duke University Libraries, MIT Libraries, Oregon State University Libraries, University of Colorado Boulder Libraries, UCLA Libraries, and University of Maryland Libraries, specifically for sponsoring our keynote presentations. Thank you to those. And we also want to thank our Zoom sponsors, NYU Libraries, UC Riverside, Clemson, and UC San Diego, who provided the Zoom rooms so that we had enough space for everybody to attend our sessions. And finally, we want to thank our infrastructure sponsor, the UC San Diego Library, who helped us manage the finances behind the scenes so that we could get everything running smoothly for you. We're so grateful to our sponsors.
Okay, everyone, my name is Jane Nichols and I'm at Oregon State University, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our final keynote for the conference. Thank you so much, Emily Drabinski and Kelli McElroy, for being our keynotes. As folks know, Emily serves as the interim chief librarian at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. And prior to this, she spent more than 15 years as a unionized librarian, moving from rank and file to local secretary and finally president of that local union following a management lockout. We're so grateful that she writes and presents widely on topics related to power in and through library systems and structures so we can all learn and grow together. And my colleague, Kelli McElroy, is an associate professor and the student engagement and community outreach librarian at Oregon State University. She was a member of the bargaining team for the inaugural collective bargaining agreement for the union, United Academics OSU, and currently serves as executive vice president. It'll be up to her whether or not we can call her Madam Vice President. Thank you both so much. We are all so looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Jane.
Yeah, what a lovely introduction. And Jane is my department head. So just to say, it feels appropriate at a conference about library management to be introduced by my manager. So thank you for that. I wanted to start with just a quick introduction. I think I said, I'm going to put this in the chat before I forget to. I made a little mini zine about union sort of jargon and things. So let me see if I can add that right in the chat. And it looks like it's not going to let me. So I'll say that that will be available on the Calm website later. So that's a little bumpy start. But one of my goals as a non-manager speaking at this conference is to talk about sort of labor, recognize that labor literacy is, oh, thank you so much. Dani says just a link to it in the chat. So thank you all for being so organized. That I'm a third generation member of teachers unions. My parents and my grandparents were all in teachers unions. So given that I always find I'm learning more about labor as I go, I want to share that with all of you as well. So Emily, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So just thank you to the organizers and to everyone for joining us today. You'll see that we don't have slides. What we're hoping to have is a conversation between the two of us as two people who have found ourselves, I don't know, Kelli, if you feel like it was by accident, but sort of by accident in the crucible of labor power and labor and management conflict. And I have found from my own experience that that has been a sort of diamond making experience, crushed to become a different kind of person, which is what we, I think, like to talk about today. So we're going to begin by sort of sharing a little bit about how each of us got interested in union work, and for me, how I moved from union side to from labor side to management side, which is the transition I've made over the past year. And then we have some sort of questions to ask each other about how union power can work and what it means to organize collective power within an institution. And I think for me, the opportunity to talk about management and labor as a structured antagonism, which is the language I'll use during this presentation, as a way that we build space for class interests to struggle over a surplus, struggle over, maybe our budgets don't feel like a surplus, but struggle over what is available. I think that bringing a sort of labor power mindset to the workplace can help us understand better how to get things done in a way that draws on the strengths of everyone around us, that takes care of everyone around us. And so I just want to express my extreme gratitude to the Calm conference people. Kelli and I had submitted a proposal for the conference, and I was like, no way they'll accept it. Nobody ever wants to talk about unions, right? Unions are a problem for us. Managers are against unions because it makes it hard to work. You can't have anybody do anything because of the classified staff union rules, right? There's a lot of talk against unions. And so the opportunity to talk about the real value they can bring not only to workers, but to those of us in management positions, I think is a real gift. And I'm so grateful for this space to talk about that. So Kelli, I wonder if you want to start by sort of sharing what got you interested in union work. How'd you get here?
Yeah, how did we get here? I do want to start, actually, I realized that I didn't jump in with my acknowledgement. So I am on the land of the traditional homeland of the Marys River, or Ampinafu Kalapuya peoples. And after the 1855 Willamette Valley Treaty, these are people who were forcibly removed. And I'll put in the chat the living descendants of these people are now part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. And I'll say, I was thinking about this in part in terms of labor and how little I know about the labor history of the people who've lived on this land and the indigenous people across the United States. So I did some research and found my next book is something else I will put in the chat here. My grandfather's Knocking Sticks, Ojibwe Family Life and Labor on the Reservation by Brenda J. Child, who is a member of the Red Lake Ojibwe, and writes her family history of how labor changed for her family in her grandparents' generation due to forces outside of their control. So I invite anyone who wants to read that book with me. I'd love to be in conversation about that. I mentioned earlier, I'm a third generation unionist and teacher, but the sort of accidental part, I think, Emily, is very real. So this is my first opportunity to be in a unionized environment. I've worked as a librarian for over 10 years, but this is the first time at OSU that I've had a union I could join, but that's partly because I helped build that union. So I've seen it through from before certification by the state. We were certified in 2018. And I was on the initial bargaining team, as Jane mentioned, which took about 2 years for us to negotiate that first contract. And then I jumped right around to do COVID related bargaining. So done a lot of bargaining for our union already. And we just had our first elections last fall. And now as of January, I've been the executive vice president. So, and we're getting ready to go back to the bargaining table again. So that's sort of how I got to be where I'm at. As far as why we started a union, it's a faculty union. So for all teaching and research faculty at Oregon State University. And there just was a longstanding concern about how the university was being run, right? So principles of shared governance are core for faculty sort of across the board. And how that gets enacted was a problem for faculty at OSU. So that's a big piece of how we got where we are. How about you, Emily? How'd you get to your place?
That's interesting. Like my family is also a union family. My father was in the Postal Workers Union in Boise, Idaho, and was part of the fight to get the right to wear shorts on your route during summers, right? So I grew up understanding that if we want to make change in the world, the best way to do that is not by ourselves. Going out on your own is extraordinarily risky behavior. But it's by banding together with other people who share our interests and concerns. So I've been lucky enough, because I'm on the East Coast, which is more densely unionized than most other parts of the country, to have been in unions for the vast majority of my library career. I started at New York Public Library as a librarian trainee, and I was in the unit there. Then I moved to Sarah Lawrence College, which is a small liberal arts college in the Northeast. It was not unionized. I spent 4 years there. From that position, I got a job at Long Island University's Brooklyn campus, and that was my first academic library union. And I don't know if anyone wants to guess in the chat how much my salary increased when I moved from an institution where I bargained for my own salary to an institution where my salary was bargained collectively. Stephanie is correct. Aaron is, I don't know math, so I can't really say if it's 20%, but I went from making $40,000 in the Northeast to making $53,000, which for me was a 20%, or 20%, a $20,000 increase in my salary. My vacation went from, my annual leave went from 15 days to 5 weeks to 8 weeks to a faculty position with sufficient research leave to do the things I wanted to do as a scholar. And that was not because I was special or cool or unique. All of us got that because it was collectively bargained. So that's sort of how I got into a union environment. And the Long Island University Brooklyn Faculty Union was the first faculty union in a private institution in the United States. That meant that we were a mighty fighting private school union. Wow. So I quickly learned that the fight was where it was at. I went on, my unit went on strike. I didn't like what we settled for. So I ran to be part of the executive board, then became secretary, and then we were locked out. And I was like, I want to be in charge of the whole pie, right? My nickname during the lockout, and I've written a lot about the lockout if you want it, I can share links with you if you're interested, but I earned a nickname in that fight, which was the switchboard. And I think that's where librarians are really, really powerful, right? We are good at connecting people to resources. Here's a resource over here, you need this, let me just put it together, put it together, put it together. So I think those skills that we have, that we bring to our work, that most of us are really passionate about, I think that is a sort of way of thinking about the world that we really need in unions, that we really need in the world, about building connections between people around resources and making claims to resources so that we can get sort of bigger pieces of the pie for the things that we care about, which is sometimes like our salaries and working conditions, our wages and working conditions, but it's also about other things too, right? Institutions that prioritize students, that prioritize the public good, that prioritize worker safety. Those of you working in non-union environments under COVID, I'd be interested in how much power you feel you have about returning safely to work. Because in at CUNY, which is a unionized environment, there's a lot, you know, it's not all of it, but quite a bit more than you would have if you were alone. So that's how I got here.
Yeah, so, well, I'm curious. So now you are a manager.
Yeah.
Why are you a manager if you're also a unionist?
Yes. So I was thinking about this because, like, I think there's a dichotomy, a binary that is useful in helping us think about how power is built and deployed, but also I think we often assume it is natural. So like most binaries, we assume it is a natural thing that labor and management are on opposite sides and they have they like have different class interests, right? That management wants to, just to give you like the return to work and COVID is like, I think a good example of this, right? Like management wants everybody back to work because the system has to keep functioning so that we can be a going concern, right? And workers want to be able to do that without dying, right? Which is, you know, not always a thing that management cares about. So I was in one of my first meetings. So I became a manager right when COVID hit. And one of my first meetings, I was called in for managers to talk about innovative ways to save money during this difficult budget time. And someone shared that, you know, we could consolidate the positions at the bursar, the registrar, and financial aid, right? Like currently there are 3 service points, we could consolidate them into 1, and then we'd only have to have 1 worker there. And that'll be like less impactful than it would have been because one of those 3 people has died from COVID. And this was just like coming out of someone's mouth in a meeting about management innovation, right? And so there's like a real difference there in how we think about and feel about people. I think why I wanted this position is because I'm really passionate about libraries. I really believe in them. I believe in their power. I believe what we have, like what we have to contribute to the world, to our institutions. And I think I can do more of that in a management position. When we talk about power, and I think we're going to talk a lot today about collective power, but there's also titular power and institutional power. So as the boss, right, of the unit of the library that I run now, I have the power to do things like set the agenda at the meetings, decide what our budget picture is going to look like, where we're going to talk about, you know, how we're going to think about the return to the building in a way that makes sense and makes us feel safe. And I think about who my class interests, who do I have class interests with? And I think especially for a conference like this, it's important to think about managers, like library managers in place like me. I'm paid a premium to facilitate the interests of capital, right? That's part of why I'm paid more than I was when I was a rank and file worker. That said, I don't actually share the interests of capital, and I don't get paid nearly enough to condemn my colleagues to death, right, by forcing them back in the building before it's safe. And so I think the question I ask myself all the time is, who am I working for? Who is my boss? And I think bringing to the management role the experience I have as a labor side person, I bring to the role of management that the sense that a priority for me is working conditions for my staff, right? The people who work for me, I want their lives to be good. The people that, those are the people whose demands I want to fulfill. That's who I work for. Those are the people who are my boss, because I believe that the workers ought to be the boss. And so I can act that way sort of as a manager. So it's definitely, there's something inherently contradictory, but I think if we shy away from taking on those management roles, those of us who have background in in labor, I think it's a real missed opportunity to envision and create the kinds of institutions that we want, where workers are valued for their input into decision-making and power sharing across an organization, which is a long way of saying I'm not totally sure it was the right move, but it's the move I made right now.
Yeah.
I have a
Well, I
question
was
for
gonna
you.
say,
Yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
It also just strikes me that it's at least a technically interim position, right? So I'm so curious, if you stay in this position long term, maybe we can have another conversation about that.
Yeah, call me in a year, because like, you know, one of the things that's tough is like I get paid a premium for when the provost says, Emily, you have to force people back to work.
Mhm.
You know, and I attended the opening keynote from the fabulous Katrina Kendrick, and just the that question of moral courage, and thinking about how being asked to act with moral courage from a position of power
Mhm.
is really, really different than being asked to sort of do that from a different kind of position. So I do believe that I now make enough money that when they ask me to do that, I'll be able to say no, but that'll be a kind of challenge. And I think I'll perhaps want your counsel on that. Yeah.
I'll be here. I'll be here.
Yeah, great. So I wonder too, having been a union officer and knowing that you're a union officer now, can you talk a little bit about the decision to take that on? And it's not really a librarian job, and it can be a kind of full-time job. So what has that transition been like for you?
It's been interesting. I mean, I think that partly our union story is a little, we're at the beginning, right? So every step of the way has been sort of like, well, someone has to do it, right? So why not me? Being on the bargaining team, it's not because we are all expert negotiators, it's because we were willing and had the time and capacity to. So I think that piece, it's not typical leadership kind of opportunity in the sense of like, I'm going to advance my career by, you know, or this is the natural next step in a progression. It's like, well, we need someone to do this work. So no one signed up for this one. So we need a body, we need a warm body. So, which isn't to say I don't have skills that are useful in that. And I think what you said about the skills that librarians bring to labor are so right on. I find that organizing documents is like one of the top things I do for my executive council is, okay, we're getting like 1 million links to news articles. Like, okay, guys, here's the Google Doc. there's a table of contents and you can link through, and they're all always kind of odd at that. I do think it supports my work as a librarian, besides the fact that it's a way to build power to improve working conditions and making sure, I mean, I do think I can, it's not that I represent the library in my role in the union in a direct way, but being able to be part of that information sharing, both directions, to be able to say, in the library, this is what's going on, and the rest of the faculty can know about that, but also to be able to come back to the library and say, I heard this is happening in the College of Ag Sciences. What are we doing about that, right? And that's just being a part of those conversations that doesn't always happen even for leadership in academic libraries, right? We have an interim dean, right, or an interim head right now. And one of the things she's been able to do is establish that the next head of our library will be a dean for the first time. So getting access to those dean level meetings will be a real change for us in terms of access to where we get to be in the meetings where decisions are happening, right? So in some ways, being more involved in my union partly is just because I want things to be better in my workplace for me and for everybody I work with and for our students and as a public institution for the state of Oregon, but also because, you know, I want us to be in the room where everything's happening. So. But I also do think, I mean, like if you have the opportunity to be in a part of a faculty union as an academic librarian, you will make the best liaison relationships you could possibly have, right? I definitely get instruction requests coming and reference questions coming from union people just because they wouldn't have known me otherwise.
I like union involvement as an outreach strategy. I feel that could be our next conversation. This is a sort of big question that I think both of us think a lot about, and so I'd be interested in letting you kick it off because it's a big one. Given your position in the library and in your union, can you tell us how you think about power and what it is and how it works?
Yeah. I
Small
mean,
question.
I think, yeah. Being involved in bargaining totally transformed how I think about power on at our institution, in that the people across the table from the union are not library management or library administration. Like, central administration makes those decisions about working conditions. You know, we doubled our paid family leave, which is huge, and the library could not have done that for even for library workers, right? So I think it really changed how I think about, you know, who can decide, right? Who can decide what happens and have consequences from that, is how I see that. So it's sort of like, it's been freeing to me in that I don't need to go to managers in the library for issues that I know that they can't control, right? So I think what we see a lot for middle managers anywhere, definitely in libraries, is that you're sort of the funnel for complaint that doesn't matter if it's, you can't solve it, but you hear about it because it's people who work directly with you, who report to you. And so that sense of responsibility and isolation, I think I heard throughout this conference, is I think in large part about being receiving complaint that you can't do anything about. But it's also freeing to know you can't do anything about it in some ways, right? I mean, maybe that's too depressing to say, but I don't know. It helps me focus, where do I target my energy, right? So if I want changes that apply, that the provost has to make decisions about, we have to take the provost. And I think we've seen that locally this week unfolding, where our president has been in the news. He used to work at Louisiana State University and did not fully investigate and follow through a number of Title IX complaints. And this has recently been in the news. There was a board of trustees meeting this week. They're the ones who hired him in sort of a secretive process. And he, you know, there was public comment. They were required to have public comment, and then they went in a private room and came out and said they would slap him on the wrist. So to me, that was a great example of, like, we're talking power, the power to be bad at your job publicly, not apologize for it, and then get more support to do your job when you make 10 times what I make, you know, 20 times what some of other workers at our university make, right? So it's just baffling to see that and not, you know, that's to me the kind of like, oh, gross moment of power. So I'm gonna pause myself because I could rant about all of that the rest of our time together, which I don't want to do. So let me throw that back to you. From your position, how you see power changed moving into a management position?
Yeah, it's been intense, because I think one of the great joys of union work, and I want to say too, like, a lot of people aren't familiar with unions because you live in states where it's very difficult to form a union, where you don't have what are called agency shops, and like there isn't a culture of organized labor, but I think there can be. Yeah, I see in the chat, Idaho also, Kara, the other Iowa state. It can be very challenging to think about, like, do these principles apply to me? But I think when I think about collective power, I think collective power can be built whether you have a union structure or not. So when I think about power as like the ability to get what I want, make what I want happen in the world. So I think all of us are familiar with sort of dysfunctional library workplaces where the thing you want to get happen, you want to make happen, it's like, for some reason, mystically difficult to do. The example I always use was at my last job, we had the sort of photocopier scanner unit in the library, and the library director wouldn't turn on the scanner function. Right? Okay, so you could use it to print, photocopy or whatever, but she wouldn't turn on the scanner. And we were like, well, can we just turn on the scanner? And she was like, no, we can't turn on the scanner. And I'm the boss and I get to decide. And like, okay, yes, and also no. So how do we build the power necessary? How do I get a super majority of everyone working in the library, because all of us are committed to turning on the scanner, because students could then scan things, which would be nice to do in a library, right? Yeah, Kara, me too. It's like I lived for a decade with those confused eyebrows. But like me going and begging the boss to turn on the scanner is of limited effect. But if I can get everybody in the library who works anywhere near the scanners and wants to turn on the scanner to sort of go to the boss's office and say, you know, we're not leaving until you turn on the scanner. That to me is like collective power. Because I go in, I say, turn on the scanner. She says, Emily, whatever, I'm not doing it for you. Goodbye, closes the door. So don't do it alone. You want to go in as a collective, you want to go in as a group where all of us want the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. So then I moved to this management position and I was like, oh, great, I can be drunk with power now. But figuring out the scope of that power is really different, because if I'm a believer in collective power, and I am, now I'm on this middle manager spot and I don't have any friends anymore. I don't have any comrades. I don't have any structures where I'm going to make comrades, you know, like the union meeting, even though I think often can be a thing where you just, I lost my train of thought because I got caught up in the chat. Remind me what I was saying, Kelli.
You were talking about union meetings and
union meetings, very boring, right? Really tough to sit through sometimes, but they don't have to be. If you run the meeting, you get to make it fun. But you go to the meeting and you get to like meet people who share your concerns, your grievances, the things that you're mad about, right? And you get to like build with them you get to turn your complaint through conversation into a demand, and then you get to begin to make plans for how we're going to get our demand met, right? And that's all a sort of process that I was really familiar with and that I really loved. And now I have more power, right? Because I get to decide what we're going to do. And I've been able to use that power, I think, to pretty good effect over the last year. Did some reorg, you know, which I didn't call in my head reorg, but called in my head making it so that people like our work, because we are really lucky to have these jobs. They're really pretty great if you love working in a library, right? So I have the power to sort of like move people around and change reporting lines and stuff like that, but I don't have the power to do a lot of things that I would want to do. And I think the managers who are at the conference like would have a lot to tell me. I've had to learn it sort of behind my computer screen, how constrained my power really is. So I have power. So like we're doing a provost search right now. There's no librarian representation on that provost search committee. I don't have the power to get myself at that table. In order to get myself at that table, I need to have a lot of conversations with people at my level to build the collective power necessary to get me into that room. And so it hasn't changed my sense that collective power is more important than singular power, unless you're like the example of the university president who can act without accountability and without fear that he'll be held accountable. I don't have that kind of power. So right now I'm looking to build connections with people at my level so that I can begin to advance the agenda that I have that I think is a worker-informed agenda, figuring out how to move that forward.
And it seems like
so I'm a manager.
Right?
I see this question. I can't attend union meetings. I'm not a member of the union. I'm not in the unit anymore. And so that's one thing that doesn't like it's been very challenging. And capitalism is structured such that if you want to move up, if you want to have the kind of titular power, they move you out of the unit. And I don't like that. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be that I continue to share the class interests with the people who are working with me, yeah, because I do.
We actually, faculty at OSU helped change state law around that, because we do not currently have a supervisor's bargaining unit within our union. We just have the sole bargaining unit. But at OSU, we have a lot of research faculty who hire a postdoc or a research associate, and then they move out of the unit. And it's this same thing of like, wait, these are really my people. I recognize I have different interests, slightly different interests in bargaining, you know, if I'm determining, you know, the conditions for the people who work under me, but really I'm a faculty member and I should be in the faculty members union. So that's been a difficult thing to negotiate. I do want to go back to the scanner just briefly because I
because Sean says I can't turn the scanner on. I see. Yeah, anyway, the scanner issue.
Just because it's like the part that always feels heartbreaking with collective, not the collective power feels great, but the part that feels heartbreaking is like, that should not be the scope of the conversation, right? Like, we should be miles past this, and you're making us fight for this. So we have to put our energy to this instead of all the other things that, you know, and we build and we get further. But I feel that this week with this piece of like, I've been in so many hours of meetings related to this presidential situation. And it's like, we all have other things to do. Like, but if you're, you know, at the top in that positional authority with the lack of accountability, like you said, you get to set the field, really, the field of vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You spoke to this a little bit. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm distracted by the scanner conversation in the chat. I'm going to turn off the chat. Sorry.
It's like photocopiers, right? There's always, and staplers. There's a lot to,
lot to say
about
to
all
unpack
of those,
there. Mm-hmm.
all of those things. I was going to say, so you talked a little bit about this, but how are you, in your current position, do you think about accountability? Who are you accountable to? What are you accountable for?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about power, that's what we're talking about. Who am I accountable to? And it's, you know, the minute I started this position, I was like, who's my boss? Who's the boss? I was like, that's the question, you know, and a question that I ask myself all the time now. Is the provost who signs my timesheets my boss? I think kind of. Do I interact with her as if she were my boss? Not so much, but the people whose timesheets I sign, I am not, those are the people to whom I feel accountable when I'm thinking about the sort of manager sort of role, that I'm accountable to those people for every decision I make and for every secret I might choose to keep, every opportunity I might hoard for myself, the things that I think people are tempted to do when they're in positions of leadership, whether a leadership in a union or leadership in a library or an institution. So I'm accountable to those people. I'm in a public institution, which was definitely a conscious choice coming out of a private school. So I'm accountable to the public and to the public good. I have to say that shapes a lot of the decisions that I'm having to think about and make now in the context of the pandemic. I think it can be difficult to think about that accountability when I have, you know, students who need access to library materials in order to complete their work. And I feel committed to providing that for them and to being accountable to their needs from the library, you know, and faculty research as well. And then accountable to my colleagues, right? And then you know, it's a little, when Kelli and I were talking, you know, planning this presentation, we were talking about like, what if I say something wrong? Like, I do feel like I'm waiting to be held accountable by my boss for some of the things that I might say in public about sort of that anecdote about someone saying, well, it's easier to consolidate the checkpoints because somebody already died, you know? So I worry about that sometimes, that I'll be called to account for myself and my behavior. And, you know, I talk a lot about contesting and pushing back and resisting, and those aren't easy things to do, and they are always really scary. And so I you know, there's a part of me that lives in some fear that I'll be, that the boss will come down on me. And I think that is a real thing, and that I'll be held accountable for values that I don't share, for a commitment to carrying out interests of the university that contradict my own, you know. And but my girlfriend Karen, who just walked out of the house, she says, if you're worried you're going to get in trouble, you're already in trouble. So I try to remember that if once you recognize that the world, that we are in a kind of, we're engaged in a kind of class war, that we're engaged in a kind of race war, and those are permanent characteristics of the United States of America, that we are always in those fights, even if there are times when I'm just like, whatever, making a spreadsheet or something, figuring out the agenda for the faculty meeting next week, right? That like we are already in trouble. Yeah.
Yes, I just want to say two things to that, because one is that I think you model for me how to walk through that fear and speak openly. I mean, as openly as you can, and choose carefully your audience and sort of when to speak out and how, and that acknowledging that the fear is real, and then you move through that fear, right? So I think that that's part of collective power, right? Where you walk out by your own, that's a lot scarier than walking out with all of your comrades. And I think the moment I immediately thought of was, I can't remember where we were in bargaining this first contract, but our provost sent out an email. And it's like, I don't even remember the specifics of it, but it was like, oh, he is blaming the union for whatever. And it went out to the whole bargaining unit, and it just was terrified. And I saw that email, my stomach dropped. And then I hopped in my group chat with the bargaining team, and everyone was like, well, I won't say what everyone said, but just the power of that community, and being able to see that and realize that not everyone had the same fear response as me. And it's like, that is a learned thing. And sometimes it's really justified, but so much of our fear, it's not that we are bad for having that fear, but we are afraid of the wrong things, right? And it's like, sometimes you're right, but most of the time you're wrong. So that's also easy for me to say, because I haven't had the experience yet, like you're saying, of at some point you go too far, maybe, and you have consequences. But what are the consequences, and are they worth it or not? I think a lot of time, as we're thinking about power struggle, those are the things that come up, right?
Yeah, I mean, feeling the fear and doing it anyway is sort of maybe like a cheesy bumper sticker, but I do think it's easier to do if you have everyone with you. And I can't say that enough times. I just really, because exactly, like, you're with people. And one thing that's great about union work is that central casting, like everybody's out of central casting. Do you find that, Kelli? There's like the union president, when I first got to LIU, he would have the budget spreadsheet, the accounts thing, printed out on a transparency with an overhead projector that was broken, obviously, because it was the modern world. And he held it up with a pack of generic cigarettes on one end. And I was like, this is union, And so, but he was really unafraid. And when the president of the university was mad at us, he was like, whatever, And I think one of the things I'd like about that structured antagonism between management and labor that you get out of a union is that when you are negotiating, you are on equal footing with administration. So when I was the president of the union, and the college president and I, we were on the same level. And it is many, many, many steps from interim chief librarian before I'm on the same level as college president. I'm never going to get there. But in a union, it was the two of us,
Yeah.
But I didn't, she took me out to lunch once, but I didn't let her pay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of accountability, it comes in part. I mean, I always think to a professor in graduate school, Terry Eastwood, who talked about the rendering of accounts. And it's like, I hear you say you feel accountable to your the people who work in your department, and also you don't have to be you are not rendering your account to them, right? Ultimately, and so I think that it's important to have that interpersonal accountability that we have with people we know we're in relationship with, whether that's as a manager or as a coworker. Also recognizing there are structures of accountability that either work or don't work. So thinking about being at the bargaining table, the boss can't not show up, right? They have to come to that table. They can drag their feet. They can not have done any work to prepare. They can ask really dumb questions. They can do, you know, any number of things, or they can be a great partner and you can get amazing things done, right? Or some of both, right? It can be any number of those things, but it's a legal relationship that they are obligated to come and work with you. So I think that is one of those flashpoint moments of like, we experience things like accountability in our personal lives in lots of ways, but then seeing those structures and how they work or don't work really has changed how I think about how to get things done. To go back to sort of how you think about power.
Yeah. Yeah, you're making me miss being part of the unit, you know? Like,
you'll be back. Or maybe you'll get
yeah,
all
definitely.
You know?
Yeah, I'll definitely be back for sure. So one of the other questions we wanted to ask each other was about sharing power. And I wonder if you have thoughts on sharing power within your union sort of leadership, sharing like how organizing a unit has made you think about power sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so Robert's Rules of Order has been coming up a lot in our union. The backstory isn't important, but we started as sort of a consensus-based organizing committee before having a formal elected officers and so on. And then our constitution and bylaws says that the executive council uses Robert's Rules of Order. So we've had all these conversations of like, do we want to, is this the right tool for us? Like, why are we using this? And it's also, I think probably many people have been in a meeting where someone used Robert's Rules of Order to stop progress from happening
many
in a
times.
Yep. But what about the whatever? And I'm not familiar enough with it to know. So I think it's a good
You can't
example
even make the
of
joke about it. Yeah.
I know, right? It's like make the own joke in the chat if you have a great Robert's Rules of Order joke. But to see how one tool can be seen by some people as creating space for many voices in a democratizing way, but also be experienced as shutting down conversation. And we've seen this recently in our union across where BIPOC faculty specifically are saying, I'm in this meeting and this is happening, and I experience like the experience is not, oh, this is democratizing, this is controlling instead. Mm-hmm. So I think as we think about building structures, it's sort of like, remember that things can be misused or used in different ways. So it feels real situational to me, I guess is what I'm saying. I do think I have a couple examples from within our library that I want to share. One is I mentioned our interim head, Anne-Marie Datering, has started sharing her notes from certain campus-wide meetings with everyone who works in the library. And it's amazing because it's like not meetings that I knew were happening even necessarily. It's obviously not all meetings, but sort of like a regular set of meetings where there's not necessarily decision-making happening in those meetings, but just like, this is information that affects all of us that we all should have access to. And it's such a simple thing to do, but has felt so freeing because it's not just for the librarians, it's not just for managers, it's anyone who wants to read. And sharing information is such a crucial part of sharing power, right? And then Jane, who introduced us, is my department chair, like I said, and she's rotating off of that position soon and has done really great work to set policy about how those transitions happen. That just makes it so much more clear to everybody involved. What does it mean to become head of the department? How much should you be planning to negotiate for? You know, what are the things that go into that negotiation? What, just like adding specificity to processes that are usually cloaked in vagueness is so helpful as a worker, right? And it's also led to conversations in our department to say, this doesn't seem quite right. Let's fix that policy. So I'm very grateful to Jane for taking the initiative to do that while she's in this role of management. How about you,
Yeah,
from a management perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the that point about transparency and broad sharing of information is super important and definitely a priority of mine, because you don't know what's going on unless someone tells you. I can already see though how quickly I lose the thread of what has and hasn't been shared and with whom. There's a degree of sort of my like managing my own sense of information overload that's pretty difficult, right? I like keep forgetting that I only told one person this or one person that, and so being really on top of that kind of transparency. And then it's been a goal of mine too to maximize autonomy and authority for people inside the library over their own work lives and conditions, right? So I am an interim chief librarian, but I'm new to the role. I've only been at the library for 2 years. I don't know a whole lot about what matters, and I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to learn or to do what it is that they want to do in the library, right? Yeah, Aaron, totally. I see you in the chat. It's like the information changes every day. So for the first few weeks of the pandemic, maybe even 2 months, I sent out an email every morning. This is what we know this morning. This is what's happening this morning, because the information was changing so quickly and the fear was so intense. And the fear was intense in ways that I never anticipated, right? Like we had a library worker who sort of stopped showing up to his meetings with his supervisor. And most of the time you'd be like, oh, I wonder what happened. Maybe went on vacation, forgot to tell us. Maybe he like got the flu, but we were like, maybe he is dead, you know, and the scale of that has been really intense over the last year. So I think information transparency is part of power sharing. I also think access to the stuff you need to do your job is really essential. So if power is, I want to get things done, I'm able to move my agenda forward. So one of the commitments I have is finding out from everybody, what do you need to move things forward? And for some people that's been an office chair, you know, some people it's been a Wi-Fi hotspot. Other people have needed temporary assistance from someone else in the library to get part of their job done that they just couldn't get done, given the you know, sort of what we've been facing. And that means lots and lots and lots of conversations. So one of the things that I don't think we'll have a lot of time to talk about, although what could be more important, the organizing conversation, that piece, right? And the skill that I learned in union work, that this sort of kind of conversation where you have an idea where you want to go, right? But you're not going to tell people what to do. You have to elicit from people what they need, right? So my goal is to have us back to circulating our collections by September, by the fall semester. So I know many of you, yeah, thanks for putting those books in the chat. I have tons and tons of copies of Secrets of a Successful Organizer. So email me after the chat and I will send you a copy in the mail. I'm committed to pushing that book out maximally. But making time to talk to every single person in the library about what's happening with them and about what they need, and eliciting from them, what do they need to be a part of what I want to do in the fall, which is circulating print, which I understand is like a big gift for us that we get to wait. But what do you need from me to feel comfortable doing that? I want to maximize access to vaccination for my staff. I want to give everybody a hand if they need help signing up for a vaccine. I want to hear what people are anxious about, because sometimes it's something I can fix and sometimes it's not. What do you need from me to do your job better? But it's not a thing I could just ask someone. So it's like having constant conversations with everybody in the library constantly. Yeah.
Well, and I just want to, the everyone in the library piece too, I think is so crucial, right? Where and I think that is from organizing too. Just my guess is when you're doing union work, you don't not talk to the people you don't like, or you don't not talk to the people who are lukewarm about the union, right? The contract is for everybody, whether they're in the union or not, if they're in the bargaining unit. So it's important to know what their priorities are. And I don't know, for me, and I think for a lot of library folks who tend to be we're helpers. It can be hard to talk to people who don't like you and what you do, right?
Yeah.
So those are skills I think from union work that apply certainly in management, it sounds like, but in other places
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, that's one thing I love about union work. It's like everybody's in and nobody's out, right? It's a closed group. There's nobody on the outside, and you have to make room for everyone, and you have to welcome everyone in and hear everybody's concerns and balance what their interests are, because it's all of us. And you know, I feel the same about the people in the working in the library now. It's like we're all in it, you know. And I kind of, you know, it's the crisis, right, has really brought home how crucial it is that we see ourselves as responsible to and for each other. And that's like across sort of job classification in the library, like we're who we've got, you know. And so building out ways for everybody to do what they need to do, to get what they need to get out of work in terms of money, connection, relationship, all of that. Yeah.
And it seems to, I mean, we don't get to idealize, you know, we're in a democratic structure. You have who you have to work with, right? So that's who's there. That might shift what your target is or what your goal, you know, how you get to your goals. But I think that we can't leave people out. So.
It's like part of what's hardest, but also most meaningful, right? Like one of my closest comrades during the lockout at LAU Brooklyn is a libertarian. That's like not my politics, you know, but it doesn't matter because we have shared concerns and shared demands, you know. And I do think like the pandemic gives us all a shared concern around safety and health and being able to keep ourselves alive during this difficult time. Yeah. Should we ask this next sort of difficult question, Kelly?
Yeah.
This is the toughest one I think to grapple with for me.
Yeah.
And you know, you can see it from us talking to you now on a Friday afternoon. The higher you go in management and the higher you go in labor, the wider it gets. So the ways that race is, that white supremacy is reproduced in systems of authority, whether it's labor side or management side, I think it's something to grapple with. And I wonder if you have any analysis as to why that might be and what could be done about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those times where I feel the lack of labor history and knowledge that I have. I just read Women, Race, and Class for the first time by Angela Davis.
That's a great book.
It's a great book. And she, when she talks about why the National Labor Relations Act excludes agricultural workers and domestic workers. So this is the federal legislation that really enshrined organized labor rights. And it excluded those types of work because that's where there were lots of Black workers, right? So the history of work in this country is racist and exploits workers in general, but Black, Indigenous, and BIPOC and people of color workers more than anybody else.
Yeah, I'm reading this book about.
We're starting from that history.
Yeah, I'm reading a book about the building of the Panama Canal, and it's a labor history of the Panama Canal. And it's, I think more labor history is really essential for us to understand how these things work. But the author, Julie Green, is a historian, great historian. She runs this book club I'm in, and so I want to read her book for the book club. Anyway, that's another conversation. Anyway, she talks about when you're building the canal, you need surplus labor. So the task was to import enough workers that you could be easily replaced, right? Because that's one of the ways that capital reduces worker power, is by having a surplus, and then you become disposable, right? So this is one of the problems with, I think, the adjunctification of higher education, including libraries, that you create a class of part-time workers who can be more easily accessed in a time of crisis, right? Because who lost their jobs in the pandemic in higher ed? There were a couple of high profile cases of faculty, but mostly it was part-time workers or contract laborers who didn't have contracts with the university, but instead were sort of, you know, worked for the food service place, right? So part-time people lose their jobs. And so you have a surplus number of workers. And she also writes about the ways that white American workers on the Canal secured their wages and working conditions explicitly by pushing Black workers out of the realm of labor protection, right? That you say, we need you to keep us getting paid more and with better housing because we're better than workers from other parts of the world, Black workers from the United States, and is very that was the claim that was made. So I think there's a tendency, and I have a tendency to do this for sure, to say that unions are amazing, but unions are also built on white supremacy and built on the exploitation of labor outside of the United States, built on the exploitation of immigrant labor. And so it's really important to keep that in mind when we're looking at unions, because the whitest place I've ever been was Idaho, where I grew up, but also since I came to New York, was the union new local presidents meeting at the NYSA, the New York State United Teachers Convention. So I went up there. I think there was one African-American local president, but the union president holds a lot of power. You also, in that position, that's a management position. You're managing the union, you're managing what's going to happen with that institution. And so I think it's really crucial to remember its sort of roots in white supremacy and all of the work that we do around equity and inclusion, in the library is work that we need to do in our unions as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but labor history, we need more of it.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link in the chat here to the University of Oregon Labor Education and Research Center, which has this great webinar series right now about racial equity and union solidarity, which I think, as far as what do we do, solidarity is the word that comes for me, where it's we have to recognize that struggles are linked. And that builds over time, right? So solidarity means I show up whether or not it's about me. I show up over the long haul. It means I will mess up and be corrected and try and make it right. It's the long haul part is sort of what I think about, where it's not about one time make a donation. It's show up over time and learn about the struggle and where you can be a part of it.
Yeah, and also where I think that notion of solidarity is really important, and maybe we can open up to Q&A after this, but thinking about solidarity as action, solidarity as behavior, right? I think we often imagine that if only my sort of white heart could be called upon to feel benevolent about people of color, this is often what your DEI training will be about. Instead, talking about solidarity, where are our shared concerns and our shared demands? How does equity for everyone in my organization help me also, right? That we are all in it together, and the solidarity we can show each other around worker struggles, around struggles against racism, around struggles against wage inequality, and those kinds of fights. It's not about being right in your brain, it's about doing the right thing, about showing up exactly as you say. I think it's really a crucial takeaway.
And I think, just to build on that, the idea of just step back and give up your power has always felt a little weird to me. And especially thinking about, so I think of solidarity as that's the structural way to do that, right? Is to, and it's not about give up your power. It's let's build power together moving forward, which always involves, the last time we talked about labor together at a conference, we made a bingo sheet, and it's got two ears, right? One mouth. So being quiet and listening is such a part of solidarity. So
definitely. Well, we could talk about unions and we could talk about power for our whole lives. And I really appreciate the chance to have this conversation with you, but I'd love to hear questions if folks have them. I don't know quite how to open the Q&A.
See, I just opened it up here.
Oh,
so
I clicked the Q&A button. Okay, so the first question, what are your recommendations for library workers who want to organize and right to work states? What do you think, Kelly?
Well, the wobbliest is the first place that I think of in terms of finding non-collective bargaining groups of workers to get together. We have a lot of, so my union is affiliated with the Association of American University Professors, and there are a lot of non-collective bargaining AAUP chapters. There's not an equivalent for libraries, and I think you and I have talked about the value that may be there in national organizing for libraries in this country. But finding other ways to have an association where you're getting people together to do the steps that we've been talking about in terms of like, what's the problem? How are we going to address it together? Even if you don't have the legal rights of a union, there are still ways to make changes.
Yeah, and you know, with the what was the court decision? The Janus decision. The Janus decision was a Supreme Court decision that made it illegal for unions to collect what are called agency fees. So this is like a little bit of, maybe I'll get it wrong, so correct me, Kelly, but so in a union, in what's called a closed shop, where everybody has to be in the union, or if you're not in the union, you pay what's called an agency fee. So you either pay union dues and you're a voting member of the union, you get to vote on the whatever comes to the floor, the contract, et cetera. But if you are in the unit, but you don't want to be a member of the union, you pay a fee equivalent to union dues as payment for the bargaining done on your behalf, right? Mm-hmm. And so what makes unions powerful is that everybody pays in, like we're all in it. Janus made it illegal. Yeah. Janus made it illegal to collect those agency fees, right? And so you could gain the benefits of the collectively bargained contract at your workplace, but you don't have to pay in, right? And so it's not required to pay. And so the people don't pay, right? They're like, well, I don't know, what the benefit is. Management runs anti-union campaigns all the time. I remember when the Volkswagen workers were organizing in, I think, Tennessee, management took they took what you would pay in union dues over the year and bought diapers with it and put this pallet of diapers in the middle of the shop floor as a representation of what it would cost you to be a member of the union. So management doesn't want you to be in a union. They're going to do everything that they can to prevent that from happening, because guaranteed you're going to make more money. You always do if you're in a union, just like that's just the truth. You make more money. So I think we're all in right to work states now, because right to work just means that you can't force a person to be in a union if they're going to be in the job. So we're all in right to work states now. So it doesn't mean that you can't organize a union. It just means it's going to be pretty hard. And you can still,
there are places where
it's outlawed.
Where it's outlawed. Yeah. So that's
right.
Sorry. That's where my mind jumped with this question. So thank you for clarifying, Emily.
Because I think people often think that they can't organize a union, even though they can. It just would be hard. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the principles of building collective power are still the same, whether you are going to do it within a union structure or if you're going to do it in some other faculty senate, library senate, that sort of thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I put a link in earlier to labor notes. I would say basically anytime I have an organizing question and I Google it or DuckDuckGo it or whatever, I end up at Labor Notes website. So it's a newspaper, but also runs a conference, has a great series coming up in April, actually, of a lot of workshops. So if you are interested in looking at how to organize Labor Notes, is a great place to get started.
Yeah, they're great. What do you do to make sure you don't fall into the trap of the professional managerial class thinking? Yeah.
I'll let you take that one, Emily. That's a tough
yeah,
one.
I mean, I do worry about getting co-opted, right? Because it's fun to be in the meeting and to be treated sort of professionally, to be treated like one of the guys, right? So I think that's I too want to be invited sailing someday by the provost. I also want to eat in a nice restaurant, and I get that. I think what keeps me from feeling co-opted though is that like I still am really close to the library. You know, I'm talking to everybody every day. I'm like on the ground every day. It's not like I'm in those meetings upstairs, right? And they don't have a particular amount of appeal to me. So I think that is helpful. So it's harder to get co-opted if you don't find those meetings to be all that fun. And the perks of it are not that exciting, you know? And also if you know, I think part of what makes the sort of dark side appealing is because it gives you a sense of personal power. And that's why I think understanding power is collective and like really knowing that in your bones, because you've made some change happen by building some power collectively. Like the sort of labor notes take would say that you don't start with a big thing, you start with a little thing, right? You try to get everybody in your little department to wear a t-shirt of the same color on the same day, right? Once you can do that, like amazing. I went to a labor notes training where it was call center workers at Verizon who had organized against a sort of hurry up, sort of, you know, make more phone calls in the call center kind of thing. And so they organized and they got every single person. So remember, if you want a super majority, if you can get everybody to do it, it's more powerful. They got every single person on the call center floor to not make phone calls for 2 minutes. They were on a timer. It was silent. And the woman who shared this story, you could tell that it had been, even though, I mean, what did she do? She just didn't make a call for 2 minutes. What the heck? But what she did was she experienced what it can mean to act together. And so once you've done that, I don't know, there's no better high, right? Like it's the best feeling, you know, that's like, I've never had a feeling come even close to that. And when you can feel it, that's the feeling you want to feel again and again and again. So do I want to be in the senior? So one of the things I want is to, if I stay in this job, is to be part of the senior cabinet. Because like right now I'm not in the cabinet and I want to be in the cabinet. Not because I think it'll be really fun to be in the cabinet and maybe I'll get invited to a horse race, but because I think being in the cabinet means I'm in the room when we have the conversations and I hear what they're saying and how they're talking about people and how they're talking about like, it's okay if somebody dies because then it's cheaper. You know, I want to be in the room. I want to know what's happening. I want to be able to say my piece. So I think give yourself that feeling, that frisson of collective power, and you won't be so, I don't know, it put me off the singular power thing.
Well, and staying connected to that over time, I think, because sometimes I think what we see is someone, you know, ends up always moving up and is looking up instead of looking back. And so, you know, if the people you're in that room with are, their priorities are what's shaping that agenda, it can be hard to remember, like, wait, why am I here? So I don't know, keeping in conversation with the everybody, like you're saying.
Yeah. What should we ask next? Oh, what about this one? Thought or advice on bridging the language of labor and administration. Former union and current management have observed language as a barrier to common understanding and collaborative labor management work for campus advocacy. Any thoughts on that, Kelly, as someone using that union speak?
I have rude thoughts about the language of administration, but I mean, I think to me, sometimes this comes down to sort of neoliberal jargon, right? Where it's like, excellence is something that comes up at our at bargaining sometimes, where it's like, of course we all want excellence, right? But also you should get a cost of living increase if you are good enough at your job to keep your job. You experience inflation. So so it's sort of, I think the language of labor is about concrete, you know, and it's tied to power, right? So I think that's sometimes where it gets confusing, where it's like, we hear platitudes or there are things that are anti-worker. And so it's hard to connect into that. So if there are specific terms that people want to throw, so excellence, innovation is another one. Innovation, we've had a thing at OSU of administrators wanting to add innovation to the tenure and promotion process. So like in entrepreneurship, so if you can go make money off of your research, that should help your tenure case, as if that's not already being represented. So it's sort of something where it's like the promotion and tenure process should be largely faculty controlled, right? That's an issue of academic judgment that your peers are judging. So it's like, what does making extra money for the university have to do with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm not actually answering your question. I'm more pointing out that it is a difficult thing to do. I mean, I think having people who can do that translation is important. So managers often are the ones, right, who get tasked with, okay, bring down this initiative and how do we put it into practice? So being able to yourself say, I recognize this is asking you to do more work for the same amount of money. And that's not great.
Yeah.
Or being able to say, okay, we'll cloak our programs in the language of administration to say, yeah, you know what's innovative is giving people enough time to do their work, dropping things that are not core to our mission, not, what's really innovative is like people having the time they need to do their work. I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah. Like, I just can't stop thinking about how management has claimed our homes as workplaces,
Yep.
like highest electricity bill ever, every month I get another note that's like, you're on track for higher than normal energy usage. And I think they would say that they had pivoted to remote operations. And I would say they have forced me to pay for my
Cost savings.
Office. Anyway, another conversation. But I wonder about David James Hudson's question in the chat. It's really nice to see your name, David. I miss you. Has a pal who has been doing research around academic librarians and worker consciousness. Reflecting on that, it seems like a lot of members of faculty unions specifically, including academic librarians, don't necessarily think of themselves as workers, but as first and foremost professionals. Why is that? What would need to happen to change it?
Yeah, I think that comes up, came up for us as we were moving to the bargaining table, in part because there is a lot of support for the idea of unions, but then sometimes people are like, oh, but I don't need a union because my working life is fine, right? So being able to connect issues at a much higher level to say, yeah, we may be professionals, but I mean, sometimes it is salary where, like Emily pointed out, unionized workers make more than non-unionized workers. So that can be a real stark comparison to be able to offer. But for faculty, for example, things like academic freedom, we got a pretty strong, academic freedom article in our contract that is grievable at arbitration. So that means that it's not up to the president to decide, to be the final step in an academic freedom conflict. We can take that to a third party arbitrator, which is sort of one of the backbones in terms of accountability, I would say. That's the way we get the administration to adhere to the contract. So I think sometimes it's just finding the right examples, which goes back to organizing, right? Where it's like, what do people actually care about? I think the adjunctification of higher ed is another one where people might say, but I have a tenured position, so that's terrible. I want that to change, but I don't feel personally affected by it. But then when you think about how that plays out at across higher education, it's very clear that they're coming for adjuncts first, but they're coming for everybody else next, right? So thinking in terms of solidarity across types of labor at a university, we've seen that in COVID too. Who gets to stay home and work? Who has to go in and work in person, or who's on furlough, right?
Yep, who's essential, right? With it, considering essential just means capable of being pressed into work. To me, that's all essential means. Like, are you subject to management control of your life during the pandemic? I also think another thing they say in the labor movement is that management is the best organizer. So if you don't think you're a worker, just hang out for a little while, watch management make a decision that greatly affects what it is you can do, and take it as an organizing moment. So if you think you're not a worker, when management says, oh, but you have to take a 5-day furlough next month, what do you think now? Now You know, it's like, I think being, you know, helping in organizing conversations to sort of translate that for people, I think is super, super important, that like in those moments, that is when you feel yourself to be a laborer. They cut your salary, you know, or they force you to work in unsafe working conditions. And I think professionals often, we want to back away from that and feel like we're special or not subject to that. And I think has a lot to do with labor education. You know, like if I had a dime for every presentation I've been to about how to negotiate for a better salary for yourself, and like that's super important, right? But like I've been to a bunch of them, and I think if you replaced a quarter of them, not even all of them, but just like a quarter of them with how to negotiate on behalf of a collective through union work, I think that would produce a better sense of being a worker. I think the focus on the individual need, the individual salary, the individual negotiation, I think really works against seeing ourselves as members of a working class, which we are if we're not the boss. I think that's what you taught me, right, Kelly? I think that's what you say. If you get a paycheck, you're not the boss.
I mean, if you have if you have a boss, you need a union.
If you have a boss, you need a union. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. I mean, I also think the worker thing, like we had our first general membership meeting like about a month ago, and we used questions from Labor Notes writer Barbara Mataloni, and just like, what do you love about your work? What drives you up the wall about your work? What could be changed to make that different? And it's like people came in and were sort of like, and then we're like, they're talking about their work. So you got to be a worker if you're talking about your work, right? So I think, you know, it's how we talk to each other about what we do.
Barbara Mataloni has a great story too. She organized to take over her union, the teachers union in Massachusetts, and she didn't expect to, but she won. And she was the only one on her slate of candidates that were attempting to take over the union. And yeah, it seems like it was kind of a lonely and difficult road for her, but she's totally fierce. Yeah. Shouts to Barbara Mataloni. Okay, I've chosen lots of questions. Kelly, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm slow to read them. That's part of the problem here. This question from Megan. Librarians at our institution are organizing now, and one of the challenges is how middle managers who will fall outside of the initial bargaining unit perceive their role in these efforts and the potential impact on our work environment now and in the future. Do you have any reflections from your union experiences that might be helpful to bring back to an institution just beginning this collective work? Absolutely. I think the two things I would say to you is one, I mean, first off, that's just really a difficult place to be in. There are restrictions often at the state level about who can be considered part of a bargaining unit together. And a lot of times that's been structured by administration in a way that makes it hard for people who do similar work to actually be part of a bargaining unit. So at our institution, in our library, we have a lot of tenure line sort of teaching librarians, and then we have what are called professional faculty, which is the category that's used for deans and for office managers. And so that's a category we haven't been able to crack that open in terms of, you know, for people in that group to unionize, their sort of strategy would be very difficult. So it's been, there's things that are really uncomfortable. And also a lot of the wins of the union apply to everybody. So there's sort of a joke that if you get a raise in bargaining, you're giving a raise to everybody above you too, because they're not going to give just the union a raise. They're also going to give a raise to other professional faculty often, or that kind of role. So I think that being open to coalition is so crucial. With the presidential stuff happening this week at OSU, professional faculty have been a huge part of how we can move forward on that. As we think they're the ones who run the Survivor Advocacy Resource Center, right? So how do we connect with them and support the work that they're doing with students? We can work together across, you know, union eligibility or bargaining unit member options and not. So being honest and being able to talk about that, I think, is difficult, but it's so worth doing.
there's this question here that I kind of want to answer because it's about me. Do I feel like colleagues have questioned my desire to be a manager? Oh, and before I say that, I see you, Megan, in the chat. Solidarity to everybody at Michigan. I'm so proud of you guys. What a difficult, challenging thing to try to do at this time. And I'm really so impressed. And so glad you guys have gone public. Have people questioned my desire to be a manager? I'd like to eventually go into library administration one day, and I feel like colleagues and even supervisors have viewed me as someone who is anti-librarian, anti-supportive patronese, or even just money and power hungry. Has anyone ever voiced a negative opinion about your move up as a step towards the dark side? Okay, so this is a really good question and one I've been thinking a lot about, and I had a conversation right after the lockout at ALA when it was in Chicago, and was sitting on the grass with having some deep dish pizza with a librarian at MIT, who I won't name because it's like, I feel like I need to make amends in private. And she was talking about her desire to move up in library administration and to be a dean. And at the time I was like, you should be a worker, you should join the worker struggle. Like, it is a sellout thing to be a manager. And I was really convinced of that in that conversation. And I'd like to go back in time and say that we need more people who care about worker rights, who care about workplace democracy in positions of titular power. I think it is really crucial. And we do, we say we don't want that, right? We say it's like it's power hungry to get that. And it is, but I think I'm power hungry on behalf of everybody who works in the library. Like because like before I was the interim chief, I was also just a librarian. And the lack of access to decision-making within the broader institution was just stunning to me, and I hated it, and I didn't like it. And so now I'm the interim chief, and I want, when I go back to that line, or when I'm in a regular like rank and file librarian job again, which will happen because I'm sure I'll fuck up and get fired, whatever. But whenever that happens, like, I want structures to be in place that enable my life, right? And so I have a concerted interest in making an environment that works for everybody because I'm in the environment too. And so I think that's really crucial to think about. And like, I definitely have some like moments where I'm like, I'm moving to the dark side because now I'm in a conversation with the provost. But one thing about like union work is that you have these structured antagonisms with the people who are of the highest authority. So I'm in the meeting with the president and I'm like, you're wrong, right? Like, I hate you because you're a bad person, right? And I'm having that conversation with her and she's really mad at me. Like we had a very toxic relationship, that president and I, and like, I don't want to be like her. Right? I want the library to function better. And I believe the library will function better if all of us are having a better time, And I think there's a lot of talk about how libraries are toxic and terrible and horrible places, but there also can be amazing. Like, I really love my work. Like, I love books, I love information. I love sharing it, right? Like I want libraries to be good, and they can be good places. And so that's my commitment. And is it going to the dark side to be in a position where I can ask for more resources for the people in the library? I kind of don't think so, like, that feels okay to me, where I can make arguments on behalf of my staff to make sure my staff, but you see that slippage, like already I'm like, my staff, it's like, I don't know, I gotta like, it's not like the temptations aren't there to feel like it's mine and I own it. And so you just always have to be like on top of that and checking it. But what's great about being in a unionized environment and appreciating and valuing that is that I get to sort of like, people push back against me all the time, because that's sort of the way things work. If you structure a democratic workplace where people can contest you and each other for stuff. So yeah.
And I just want to point out too, I mean, the idea of the structured antagonism doesn't mean there's hate. It doesn't mean and so I would much rather be in conflict in the zone where we're both relatively in agreement that we want these things to happen than like, wow, you think we shouldn't get colas. It's like, yeah. Let's push the field of engagement to where we're, a lot closer. That sounds great.
Yeah.
I will always take managers and administrators who get it to ones who don't, right? So,
because it doesn't have to be that we like are at loggerheads and hate each other. And I think that's a fantasy, you know, that people have. Sometimes it is like that. It doesn't have to be like that. You know, we can choose to make it not that. Yeah. But you're, you know, it's just like in the presidential election, you're choosing your adversary, you know, and I think I'm a decent adversary. You know, I guess that would be my leadership aspiration, to become a decent adversary. Yeah, it's 4:55. I wonder if we should wrap it up and let Dani say some closing words about the conference.
Can I say one last thing? Just there was one question about unionized librarians who aren't also faculty. So I want to say yes, absolutely. University of Washington libraries are in a unionization campaign right now. That's sort of a lot of types of workers across the library. So there are options. Reaching out to labor organizations in your area is a great way to get started. So just if you know, anywhere that's affiliated with a union, that can be a good way to get started. Just talking to people who are real skilled organizers will help you navigate, like, what are the legal requirements if you want to do that collective bargaining route, or I mean, I think the Alphabet Union at Google is a good example of, they haven't, formed a collective bargaining unit, but are doing wall-to-wall. Any workers at the Alphabet company can join their union. And so they have power in that way that's very different from, what they had before. So different ways to come together. So sorry, that was my
Kelli,
last one.
And then my last point, Kelli, you know how like librarians will talk to anybody? Like we're just super, like, many of us, not everybody, but many of us are like, yeah, sure, I'll talk to you about that. Union librarians are like that on steroids, right? I don't know. I have never said no to having to just say, let's have a quick call about that. Just so Kelli and I are resources, and we know a bunch of people who do this kind of work too. So please reach out.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll put my union email address in the chat here, actually. Do that now.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Emily and Kelli. I can't imagine a better way to have finished off our conference than with this really amazing conversation about labor and power, and that we don't have to be managers in the same way that we've experienced other managers, and we can create the reality, hopefully, that we want to see in this profession. So I'm leaving feeling really inspired. We also would love to share with you Wilson, Steve Borelli's beautiful pup, who we have decided is our newly minted mascot. Hopefully that is okay. Again, you can share your pet pictures on Twitter with us. We've dropped the feedback form for both this session and the conference overall in the chat. You'll also receive that in an email from Eventbrite. We really appreciate all of you for being here and making this conference what it was. We look forward to engaging with you again, hopefully, well, next year for sure, but maybe before that with some other pieces of this conference. And thank you all again. So happy and humbled to be here with you. So thanks, everyone.
Bye.